As part of the ingenious table project, I needed something to put the shoes on. So I thought I'd make little tiny soles, like little foot-shaped things that the shoes could go on at the bottom of the legs of the table. So I got a Vectric Aspire, or I could use VCarve, same program for what we're doing here. Create a new file, and I made something. I had a piece of plywood about 2 feet by 4 feet. So I set that up. It's about 1/2 inch thick. And I set the origin in the lower left corner. One thing I do is choose something that looks like plywood here, which I just chose light beige. Now what I had done is I actually created a prototype out of a piece of plywood and just sort of did it manually, cut it out on a bandsaw. But I wanted to make a whole bunch of them the same. So I used the feature in Aspire where you can import a photo and then trace it. So I just put this little piece of wood on my chair, took a picture of it, and played around with the parameters. So there is a little bit too much threshold there. Just play around with the various sliders until you get the... See, that doesn't actually get the shoe at all, or the foot part at all. There, right about there. Do a preview of that. Now I can see my shoe bit in the center. So I import that, turn off the bitmap layer. Get rid of that bit around the edge. And there is my sole of a shoe. Now, it's very small, so I need to size it to the right size. So what I did is I made a rectangle on screen about the size that I want this to end up, and then I resize the traced image to that size. So it's about 4.33 inches, 4.4 inches high. And I'll just center everything. Okay, use the wrong thing here to center this. So that centers it to the table. The one down below the button actually centers it within the object, so that would have been a little bit better to use, but there we go. Now you hold down Shift and you can resize this in both dimensions at the same time. There. So now we have the sole the right size. I can get rid of that rectangle. Now I created an array of these. Oh, the first thing I did was I flipped it. There's absolutely no need for this, but it was aesthetically pleasing to me that I get a pair of them that looked like a pair. Absolutely no reason, because you could just flip it over when you've created it, but There we go. Made a copy. Move it over a little bit. So I'm moving it over enough so that my router bit, which is a 1/2 inch bit, will have enough room to fit between them. And I do an array here. And I'll just take a few of those and move them down. Okay, so there they are, arrayed on my piece of plywood. Now we're ready to do a tool path. So I'm going to do a profile cut. So it just goes through the depth of the plywood. There's my feeds and speeds. So I'm using about 30 inches a second, or a minute. And a pass depth of 1/4 inch. I'm setting the rotor speed here. On my CNC table, the rotor speed is controlled by this setting. Now I'm machining on the outside of the lines. And you can choose whether you want to go with a climb or conventional cutting, which just controls the direction the rotor bit goes around the profile. Give it a name. Now I've created my tool path. Now I'll preview it here. So you can see what you have a couple of layers of cutting on all those shoes, and you can see the order it's going to cut in. Then I realized I'd like to add tabs to this. That puts one in. I'm setting the size of the tabs, and then you use the Edit Tabs button to show exactly where you want them to go. So it's the length and the depth. And there we go. So now we have tabs sort of on each side of each sole. In the end, these tabs didn't work too well. I had the depth set wrong on the plywood, and the plywood was bulging up a little bit in the center of the rotor table. So as it would cut each one, it would kind of come loose, but it was a nice idea. Here you can see the tabs that it leaves behind. So it's purely my own machine setup that caused that to fail. I'm using metric plywood, Baltic birch, so the thickness is a little bit less than ½ an inch. All right, now it's time to export this tool path. And I have my type of rotor set up there, and I'll just save that out to a file. So now I have a G-code file ready to go on a CNC router.